I was there at Riverside National Bank in Akron, Ohio, the day everything changed. Officer Mike Lawson ripped the check from Ruby Thompson's hands and laughed as it fluttered to the floor. She was 70 years old, and he sneered, snapping the cuffs so tight her fingers went numb. His breath smelled of coffee and contempt as he shoved her down. "This bank isn't your charity, and I'm not your babysitter," he said. Her heart hammered, but she stayed silent, eyes fixed on the scuffed boots behind her. My boots. I knew exactly how many seconds it takes to end a career. When arrogance meets the wrong witness, sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the bank, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Ruby Thompson stood in line, her arthritis-stiffened fingers holding her late husband's pension check from the Summit County Mill. The paper trembled slightly in her grip, but her spine remained straight, her dignity intact despite the growing unease in her stomach. When it was finally her turn, the young teller, Sophie Reynolds, barely glanced up. "How can I help you?" Her tone was flat, rehearsed. "Good morning," Ruby said warmly, sliding the check and her ID across the counter. "I'd like to cash this check, please." Sophie picked up Ruby's driver's license, squinting at it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This seems—" She paused, letting the word hang. "Could you verify your address again?" "It's the same as it's been for 40 years, dear. 1247 Oak Street." Behind Ruby, I shifted my weight slightly. My training allowed me to maintain a casual stance while cataloging every detail. My eyes tracked the security camera positions, noting their angles. I counted 4 visible cameras, plus the standard behind-counter setup. A framed poster near the teller window listed various police badges from the county and city, suggesting close ties with local law enforcement. Sophie's voice grew louder, more theatrical. "And you're saying this check is from your husband's pension?" "Yes," Ruby replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands, "as it has been every month for the past 12 years. It's just that the amount seems—" Sophie's eyes darted to her supervisor's office. "One moment, please." The other customers in line began to stir, some showing irritation at the delay, others watching with uncomfortable interest. A young mother pulled her child closer. An elderly white man in a golf shirt made a show of checking his watch. Brian Caldwell emerged from his office, his shirt sleeves rolled up to display an expensive watch. He leaned close to Sophie, their whispered conference just loud enough for certain words to carry. Suspicious activity. Verify the source. Potential fraud. That last word echoed in the quiet bank lobby. Ruby's shoulders stiffened, but her voice remained measured. "Mr. Caldwell, I've been banking here for over 4 decades. You can check your records. This is a routine transaction." Caldwell's smile was thin, dismissive. "Ma'am, we have procedures we must follow. Perhaps you're confused about the origin of this check." "I am not confused," Ruby said firmly. "I would like to speak to the branch manager." "The manager is unavailable," Caldwell replied quickly. "Too quickly. And given the circumstances, I believe we should involve other authorities to sort this out." I observed Caldwell's body language, the slight smirk, the way he positioned himself to loom over Ruby's smaller frame. My retired SEAL fingers flexed once, then relaxed. My face remained impassive, but my awareness heightened as Caldwell stepped away to make a phone call. More customers were watching now. Several had their phones out, recording the scene with varying degrees of subtlety. The young mother was hurriedly gathering her things, preparing to leave. The man in the golf shirt had stopped pretending to check the time and was openly staring. Sophie's demeanor had changed completely. She'd stepped back from her window, arms crossed, looking everywhere except at Ruby. "You'll need to wait here," she said, her voice now clipped and official. "I've done nothing wrong," Ruby said quietly, but her hands were shaking more visibly now. She reached into her purse for her heart medication, the bottle rattling slightly as she gripped it. I noted the security guard by the door, shifting his stance, one hand moving to rest near his hip. The sunlight caught the guard's badge, throwing a sharp glare across the lobby. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Caldwell returned, standing unnecessarily close to Ruby. "The authorities will help us resolve this situation." His voice carried a note of satisfaction that made my jaw tighten imperceptibly. "My husband worked 30 years at the mill," Ruby said, her voice clear enough to carry across the now silent lobby. "This is his pension check. The same check I've cashed here every month since he passed." "Ma'am," Caldwell said, emphasizing the word in a way that turned it into an insult. "If you continue to make a scene, we'll have additional problems." Through the bank's glass doors, ordinary traffic moved past, oblivious to the tension building inside. A mother pushed a stroller. A mail carrier sorted letters at his truck. Then, cutting through this ordinary scene, a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. The bank doors swung open with a soft whoosh. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their boots clicking on the marble floor. "Ruby Thompson," the taller one called out, his hand resting casually on his belt. The atmosphere in the bank crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. Phones kept recording. The security guard moved closer to the entrance. Sophie Reynolds stood behind her counter, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I remained still, my training allowing me to appear relaxed while my mind calculated distances, angles, and potential scenarios. My eyes tracked both officers' movements, noting their name tags, their body language, the way they positioned themselves to control the space. The 2 officers approached the counter with practiced swagger, their boots echoing on the marble floor. Officer Mike Lawson took the lead, his face set in what he probably thought was authoritative concern, but came across as barely concealed satisfaction. "Step away from the counter, ma'am," Lawson commanded without preamble. He didn't ask what happened, didn't check with the bank staff, didn't review the check or Ruby's ID. His mind was already made up. "Officer, if you'll just let me explain," Ruby began, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I said, step away." Lawson's voice hardened. He moved closer, invading her space. When Ruby hesitated, trying to gather her belongings, Officer Paul Kramer grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh as he yanked her sideways. The sudden movement sent her purse tumbling from the counter. It hit the floor with a crack, contents spilling across the polished marble. Orange prescription bottles rolled in every direction, some pills scattering free from their containers. "My medication!" Ruby cried out. She tried to bend down, but Kramer wrenched her arm higher behind her back. "Ah!" The pain in her cry made several customers flinch. More phones came out, their cameras recording the scene. The young mother covered her child's eyes. The man in the golf shirt had backed away, but his phone was steady, capturing everything. I stood motionless, my military training evident in my controlled breathing and calculating gaze. My eyes locked onto Lawson's badge number and Kramer's. I noted how Kramer's grip was deliberately placed to cause maximum discomfort, how Lawson positioned himself to block the main security camera's view. "Please," Ruby said, her voice strained. "My heart condition. I need those pills." Kramer's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Sure you do. Probably confused about those too, aren't you? Just like you're confused about this check." "I'm not confused about anything," Ruby insisted, dignity intact despite her awkward position. "This is harassment, plain and simple." "Resisting arrest," Lawson announced loudly, playing to his audience. He pulled his handcuffs free with theatrical flourish and potentially assaulting an officer. My jaw clenched as I watched Lawson snap the cuffs on far tighter than necessary. The metal bit into Ruby's delicate wrists, but she didn't cry out again. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her head remained high. Sophie Reynolds had retreated from her window, suddenly fascinated by her computer screen. She wouldn't look at Ruby now, wouldn't acknowledge the scene she had instigated, but there was satisfaction in the slight curve of her lips, in the way she held herself. "Officer," Ruby tried one more time. "I have identification, bank records, everything to prove it. You have the right to remain silent." Lawson cut her off, voice dripping with mock formality. "I suggest you use it." The sunlight through the windows felt colder now, harsher. It caught the metal of the handcuffs, the badges, the scattered pills on the floor. I observed how Kramer kept unnecessary pressure on Ruby's arm, how Lawson's free hand rested casually on his weapon, a subtle threat to anyone considering intervention. More customers had backed away, forming a loose circle around the scene. Their phones captured every moment. The small, dignified elderly woman in handcuffs, her spilled medication, the 2 towering officers, the bank staff's deliberate indifference. The security guard had moved to block the entrance, ensuring no one could leave or enter without police approval. "This is how you treat a grandmother," someone in the crowd muttered, but not loudly enough to draw attention. Lawson heard it anyway. His smile widened. "Age doesn't excuse criminal behavior," he announced to the room. "Neither does confusion. Or he paused meaningfully. Other factors. My fingers flexed once, then relaxed. My combat-trained mind had already mapped out 14 ways to neutralize both officers without permanent damage. But I remained still, understanding that immediate intervention would only make things worse. Timing mattered. Justice required patience. Kramer started moving Ruby toward the exit, his grip still unnecessarily tight. Her sensible shoes clicked softly on the marble floor, echoing in the tense silence. She passed her scattered belongings without looking down, her dignity a shield against their cruelty. "Wait!" A new voice cut through the tension. "Stop this immediately!" A well-dressed man in his 50s burst from the back offices, almost running across the lobby. His name tag identified him as Robert Ellis, senior branch manager. His face was flushed with alarm as he took in the scene. "Everyone just calm down," Ellis called out, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "There's been a misunderstanding." Karen Porter's heels clicked rapidly across the marble floor as she hurried from her office. Her face a mask of professional concern. She carried a stack of papers, waving them like a white flag. "Officers, please. I've verified everything." Her voice carried authority despite her breathlessness. "The pension check is completely legitimate. We have Mrs. Thompson's full transaction history right here." Lawson's grip on Ruby's arm didn't loosen. "Ma'am, we've got a situation here." "No, you don't." Karen's tone sharpened. She thrust the papers forward. "This is a valid check from Summit County Mills Pension Fund. Mrs. Thompson's late husband worked there for 32 years. She cashes his pension check here every month." The lobby had grown uncomfortably quiet. Phones still recorded. I watched Lawson's face darken as he realized his mistake was being documented. "Remove the handcuffs," Karen ordered. "Now." Kramer looked to his partner, uncertain. Lawson's jaw worked back and forth before he finally reached for his keys. The cuffs came off with a harsh click. Ruby slowly brought her hands forward, wincing. Angry red marks circled her wrists, already darkening to bruises. She rubbed them gently, her movements careful and deliberate. "Mrs. Thompson?" Karen began, her voice softening to a carefully measured tone. "On behalf of Riverside National, I want to express our deepest regrets for this unfortunate misunderstanding." I noted how she avoided placing blame, how her words danced around any admission of wrongdoing. "Professional damage control, nothing more." "Your check will be cashed immediately, of course," Karen continued, "and we'll waive all fees for the next 6 months as a gesture of goodwill." "That won't be necessary," Ruby said quietly. She bent down slowly, gathering her scattered pills. No one moved to help her except me. I knelt beside her with quiet efficiency. "Ma'am," Lawson cut in, his voice hard with wounded pride, "let me remind you that causing disturbances in financial institutions is a serious offense. We'll overlook it this time, but future incidents." Future incidents. I spoke for the first time, my voice low but carrying clearly across the lobby. I stood, Ruby's medications carefully organized in my hands. "You mean like exercising her legal right to cash a legitimate check?" Lawson's hand twitched toward his weapon, but Kramer touched his arm. The crowd was still watching, still recording. The moment stretched taut as a tripwire. "We're done here," Kramer muttered. "Come on." The officers retreated, their boots no longer echoing with authority. Lawson paused at the door, looking back at Ruby with unconcealed hostility. "Be more careful next time, ma'am. We might not be so understanding." Karen quickly stepped between them. "I'll personally escort Mrs. Thompson to my office to complete her transaction." "No." Ruby's voice was faint but firm. "I need some air." She took an unsteady step toward the exit. I moved closer, noticing how she pressed one hand to her chest, how her breathing had grown shallow and quick. "Mrs. Thompson?" I kept my voice gentle. "Would you like some help outside?" She nodded, accepting my arm. Together, we walked slowly toward the doors, past the watching crowd, past the security guard, who suddenly couldn't meet our eyes. The sunlight was harsh after the bank's dim interior. Ruby's steps faltered as we reached a concrete planter. She gripped it for support, her breathing increasingly labored. "Ma'am," I steadied her. "Should I call an ambulance?" "They've been watching me," she whispered, "for years now. Ever since I found those discrepancies in the books. What discrepancies at the plant before it closed. Her words came in gasps. They think I still have proof. Mrs. Thompson. Karen had followed us outside. Are you all right? Call 911, I ordered, helping Ruby sit on the planter's edge. She needs medical attention. Karen pulled out her phone, stepping away to make the call. I stayed close to Ruby, monitoring her breathing, noting how her left arm trembled. I'm Darius, I said softly. Darius Washington. I've got some medical training. Try to take slow breaths for me. Darius. She managed a weak smile. Thank you for staying, for seeing. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ruby's breathing remained shallow and quick. I kept my hand steady under her elbow, a quiet anchor in the chaos. They won't stop, she whispered. Not until... Save your strength, I murmured. We'll talk later. The ambulance pulled up, lights flashing. Paramedics jumped out, equipment in hand. They worked quickly, efficiently, loading Ruby onto a stretcher. Her vital signs were concerning enough that they wanted immediate transport. I'll ride with her, I told them, my tone brooking no argument. I helped secure the stretcher, then climbed into the ambulance. As the doors began to close, I glanced back at the bank one last time. The security camera mounted above the entrance moved slightly, its lens rotating away from the scene. Someone inside was already managing evidence, controlling the narrative. My face remained impassive, but my eyes hardened with recognition. I'd seen this pattern before, the calculated humiliation, the masked cruelty, the subtle cleanup afterward. The ambulance doors closed with a final thunk. Through the small windows, I watched Riverside National Bank recede as we pulled away, its polished columns and gleaming windows hiding secrets that were about to become my personal mission. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Akron General Hospital's third floor, I stood in the hallway, my back against the wall, watching medical personnel come and go. My stance was relaxed but alert, a habit from years of training that never quite faded. Through the half-open door, I could see Ruby Thompson's small form in the hospital bed, finally resting after hours of tests and monitoring. Dr. Rachel Bennett emerged from the room, clipboard in hand. She moved directly to me, having recognized me as the steady presence who'd stayed through admission. Mr. Washington. Her voice was low, professional. Mrs. Thompson is stable now, but I need to be clear about something. The stress she experienced today could have killed her. Her heart showed signs of significant strain. I nodded once. What's her prognosis? With proper medication and rest, she should recover. But Dr. Bennett's expression hardened. Another incident like this could trigger cardiac arrest. She mentioned this wasn't the first time she's been harassed. No. My voice remained neutral, but my eyes flickered with contained anger. It wasn't. Well, it needs to be the last. Her body can't take this kind of stress. She glanced at her clipboard. We'll keep her overnight for observation. She's asked about her purse and personal items several times. They're still at the bank. I'll retrieve them. I straightened from the wall. Does she need anything else? Just rest and someone watching out for her. Dr. Bennett gave me a measuring look. Are you family? No, just a witness who stayed. Well, she's lucky you did. She handed me a prescription slip. Her heart medication needs to be refilled. The pharmacy downstairs is still open. I took the slip, committing the medication name to memory. I'll handle it. I walked quietly into Ruby's room. She stirred at my approach, her eyes opening slowly. I'm going to get your things from the bank, I said softly. And your prescription. Do you need anything else? No, thank you. Her voice was tired but clearer than before. You've done so much already. Try to rest. I won't be long. The drive back to Riverside National Bank took some time. The bank was closed, but I'd already called ahead. A security guard met me at the side entrance with Ruby's purse and a sealed envelope. Probably some kind of official apology crafted by their legal team. Back in my motel room later, I sat on the edge of the bed, television playing quietly. I delivered Ruby's belongings and medication, made sure she was comfortable, and left my number with both her and the nursing staff. Now I watched the local news with growing disgust. Incident at Riverside National Bank this morning. The anchor was saying the police department has issued a statement regarding the arrest of an elderly woman who allegedly became aggressive during a routine transaction. The screen showed Officer Lawson speaking from the police station steps. The subject appeared disoriented and combative when questioned about suspicious documentation. Officers attempted to de-escalate the situation, but she became increasingly agitated. While we regret any distress caused, our officers followed proper procedure to ensure everyone's safety. My jaw tightened. I pulled out my phone quickly, finding what I'd expected: edited body cam footage already circulating online. I watched it carefully, noting the obvious cuts, the missing angles, the convenient gaps in audio. Years of reviewing mission footage made the manipulation clear to me. My phone rang. Ruby's hospital room number flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Thompson, they're saying terrible things." Her voice shook. "On the news, online, people are calling the hospital, leaving messages. They're saying I tried to commit fraud, that I attacked those officers." She broke down crying. "Why are they doing this?" "They're trying to control the story," I said quietly, "to protect themselves." "The bank." She took a shuddering breath. "They sent someone. A notice. I'm banned from all Riverside National locations. They say I'm a security risk." My free hand curled into a fist. I forced it to relax. "Try not to watch the news right now. Focus on resting." "What am I going to do? That's where my husband's pension check is from." "We'll figure it out," I assured her, "one step at a time." After calming her as best I could, I hung up and opened my laptop. I began documenting everything methodically: names, badge numbers, witness positions. I added screenshots of the edited footage, noting where cuts occurred. My training had taught me the value of detailed intelligence gathering. I'd planned to leave town the next day, head west to start my retirement. Those plans felt distant now, irrelevant. Something was very wrong in this town, something that went deeper than one incident of racism at a bank. Ruby's whispered words about discrepancies and being watched nagged at me. My phone buzzed with a news alert late that night. I read it twice, my expression unchanging, but my eyes growing cold. Local police issue arrest warrant for Ruby Thompson. Charges include attempting to pass forged documents and resisting arrest. The phone creaked in my grip. I set it down carefully, deliberately, before I could break it. They were moving faster than I'd expected, using the night shift to push through paperwork while Ruby was hospitalized and vulnerable. It was an efficient strategy. I'd used similar tactics myself in darker times. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. A patrol car rolled past slowly, its lights off. They were probably already watching the hospital, waiting for her release. The system was closing ranks, following a familiar pattern I'd seen in corrupted institutions worldwide. I pulled out a small notebook and began writing, my movements precise and controlled. Names, locations, connection points, the foundation of what would become a mission plan, though I hadn't admitted that to myself yet. In the background, the news continued to spin its narrative, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was remembering other missions. Other times I'd dismantled systems from within. The red and blue lights painted harsh shadows across Ruby Thompson's small yellow bungalow. Officer Mike Lawson climbed out of his patrol car, warrant in hand, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. His partner, Paul Kramer, flanked him as they strode up the narrow concrete path toward the front door. From behind a large oak tree across the street, I watched, my phone already recording. I'd driven straight here after a nurse called to warn me that Ruby had checked herself out against medical advice, desperate to get home to her medication and familiar surroundings. But I'd arrived just too late. "Mrs. Thompson." Lawson's voice boomed through the quiet neighborhood. "Police, open up." The porch light clicked on. Through the screen door, I could see Ruby's slight figure wrapped in a housecoat. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open. "Officer Lawson." Her voice was thin, uncertain. "What's happening?" "We have a warrant for your arrest." Lawson thrust the paper at her. "Step outside, please." "But I just got home from the hospital," Ruby protested softly. "My heart." "Now, Mrs. Thompson." Kramer moved forward, hand on his cuffs. "Don't make this difficult." Porch lights began switching on up and down the street. Curtains twitched. Neighbors emerged onto their front steps, but no one spoke up. No one moved to help. My jaw clenched as I studied my phone, documenting every moment. "Can I at least get my medication?" Ruby asked. "You can sort that out at the station." Lawson grabbed her arm exactly where the bruises from earlier still marked her skin. She winced, but didn't cry out. My free hand curled into a fist as I watched them cuff her again. My training screamed at me to intervene, but I forced myself to stay hidden. Raw footage would be more valuable than a confrontation right now. "Ruby Thompson," Lawson recited loudly, clearly playing to his audience of neighbors. "You're under arrest for attempting to pass forged documents, resisting arrest, and making false statements to law enforcement." "Those charges are lies," Ruby said, her voice stronger now despite her obvious fear. "You know they're lies." "Watch yourself," Kramer warned, tightening the cuffs. "You're just making it worse." They led her to the patrol car, Lawson's grip unnecessarily rough. I noticed how they angled her head down, a practiced move to make her look guilty to the watching crowd. As they drove away, I counted 4 other patrol cars circling the block, a show of force meant to intimidate the whole neighborhood. I waited a few minutes, then drove to the police station. The booking process would take at least an hour. I parked across the street, watching officers come and go, noting shift changes and security patterns. At midnight, I walked in. The desk sergeant looked up with obvious recognition. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about Ruby Thompson. Booking's not finished. No visitors. When will she be released?" The sergeant's expression hardened. "That's not your concern." "She needs medical attention," I said evenly. "She has a heart condition. Our medical staff will evaluate her." A new voice spoke from behind me. Officer Lawson approached, coffee in hand. "You know, Mr. Washington, for someone who just happened to be in line at the bank, you seem awfully invested in Mrs. Thompson's situation." I turned slowly, my stance relaxed, but ready. "Just a concerned citizen." "Well, here's some friendly advice." Lawson stepped closer, coffee forgotten. "This is a small town. We look after our own. Whatever you think you're doing here, whatever you think you saw, mind your business. Go back to wherever you came from." "Is that a threat, Officer Lawson?" "That's professional courtesy." Lawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't make me get unprofessional." I held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then turned and walked out. I could feel multiple sets of eyes tracking me through the glass doors. In my car, I sat quietly for several minutes, processing the speed of escalation, the coordination between bank and police, the prepared media response. This wasn't just corruption. It was practiced corruption. Back in my motel room, I pulled a heavy black duffel bag from under the bed. The lock clicked open under my thumbprint. Inside, beneath a false bottom, lay the carefully preserved evidence of 20 years of service. Medals, classified mission reports, commendations signed by presidents. Deeper still were the documents that mattered now. Files on financial networks, corruption patterns, the methodology of institutional rot. I spread the materials across the bed methodically. My training had taught me to analyze before acting, to understand systems before dismantling them. The same techniques I'd used to collapse terrorist cells could work here. Find the pressure points, identify the key players, gather leverage, then apply force precisely. I pinned a map to the wall, marking the bank, police station, and city hall. I added sticky notes with names, connecting them with red thread. Patterns emerged. The pension fund, the manufacturing plant closure, Ruby's old bookkeeping job, 20 years of small-town corruption crystallizing around a single point of resistance, an elderly black woman who'd noticed the wrong numbers in the wrong ledger. A car drove past my window, slow and deliberate. I didn't need to look to know it was a patrol car. They'd be watching me now, assessing the threat. Good. Let them waste resources on surveillance while I worked. Through the thin motel walls, I could hear the news starting up in the next room. More lies would be spreading across breakfast tables and phone screens. More pressure would be applied to Ruby's already weakened heart. The system was tightening its grip, confident in its power, certain of its impunity. As the first gray light crept through my window, I began to plan. The sun hadn't fully risen when I straightened the last piece of red thread on my motel room wall. I'd slept a couple of hours, military habits keeping my mind sharp despite exhaustion. Coffee from the ancient machine tasted like burnt plastic, but I drank it anyway, studying my work. The wall told a story not just of yesterday's incident, but of something deeper. Riverside National's expansion timeline, police pension fund reports, city council minutes spanning 2 decades. Something had happened at that factory, and Ruby Thompson had seen it. I checked my watch. The county clerk's office would open soon. I showered quickly, chose plain clothes that wouldn't draw attention, and headed out. My rental car started on the first try, but I noticed fresh tire marks where a vehicle had parked outside my room overnight. They were watching, which meant they were worried. The Riverside National Records Office occupied a corner of the main branch, the same one where they'd arrested Ruby. I walked in like I belonged there, nodding to the security guard. The public records terminal sat unused, its ancient screen glowing blue in the morning light. "Can I help you?" A young clerk approached, her smile professional but wary. "Just need to check some property records," I said, my voice calm and forgettable. "Research for a real estate project." I spent 40 minutes scrolling through digitized documents, taking pictures with my phone when no one was watching. The pattern jumped out immediately. Riverside National had acquired 6 failed businesses in the past 15 years, including the old manufacturing plant where Ruby had worked. Each closure followed the same timeline: financial irregularities, sudden layoffs, quick sales. The county clerk's office proved even more interesting. I signed in as a title researcher and buried my real searches between legitimate property lookups. The manufacturing plant's closure had triggered a wave of foreclosures, all handled by the same law firm. Properties resold at fraction prices to shell companies that traced back to familiar names: Caldwell, Porter, names that matched my wall of red thread. By mid-morning, I had enough background. I drove to the police station, parking in clear view of the cameras. Inside, the desk sergeant from last night had been replaced by a younger officer who didn't hide his suspicion. "I'm here to see Ruby Thompson," I stated. "Visiting hours aren't until she has a right to visitors. I'll wait." Some time passed before they led me to a small room with scratched plexiglass. When they brought Ruby in, my jaw tightened. She looked collapsed somehow, smaller than yesterday, her wrists visibly swollen from the cuffs, but her eyes still held that quiet dignity. "Darius." Her voice crackled through the speaker. "You shouldn't be here. How are you feeling?" "They gave me some of my medication." She touched her chest. "Not all of it." A guard shifted closer, pretending to check his phone while listening. I lowered my voice. "Tell me about the factory, Ruby. About the books you kept." Her eyes darted to the guard, then back. "That was a long time ago. But you remember?" "Numbers don't lie," she said carefully, "even when people do. I was good at my job. Too good, maybe. The payroll accounts. There were discrepancies, money moving where it shouldn't. I reported it through proper channels." She smiled sadly. 2 weeks later, the plant announced it was closing. 400 people lost their jobs overnight and the records destroyed in a small fire. Very convenient. Her hands trembled slightly. The next day, my house was broken into. Nothing taken, just searched. Then my tires were slashed. Then my son's scholarship was suddenly revoked. She leaned forward. "Darius, please go home. This town, it knows how to hurt people without leaving marks." The guard stepped closer. "Time's up." I stood. "I'll be back." "Don't," Ruby whispered. "Please, I'm old. I'm tired. They win." Outside, I spotted the patrol car immediately. Third pass in 15 minutes. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I drove to my next stop, the law offices of Ellis & Associates. Margaret Hayes's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house. The secretary tried to turn me away, but I simply sat in the waiting room until Margaret appeared, elegant in a charcoal suit that couldn't hide her exhaustion. "Mr. Washington," she gestured me inside. "I assume this is about Ruby Thompson. You're withdrawing from her case. Doctor's orders." Margaret closed the door. "Blood pressure issues. Very sudden. Like the factory closure was sudden." Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened on her desk chair. "That's ancient history." "Not to them." I stayed standing. "How did they approach you? Phone call, visit, or just a friendly reminder about your daughter's job at City Hall?" Mr. Washington? Margaret's voice dropped. I've spent 30 years defending people in this town. I know which battles can be won. This isn't one of them. Whatever you're planning, don't. The consequences already started. I turned to leave. Thank you for your time, Miss Hayes. They'll destroy her to keep this quiet. No, I paused at the door. They won't. Back at the motel, I added Margaret's name to my wall. Connected, but compromised. A victim and a warning. I worked through the afternoon building my case piece by piece. The factory's employee list, the pension fund transfers, the property sales. A pattern of corruption so deep it had become the town's foundation. The sun set. I cleaned my weapon more from habit than necessity. I wasn't here for violence, not yet. Information was my first weapon, pressure points, leverage. The right documents in the right hands could do more damage than bullets. Late that night, footsteps approached my door. Heavy boots on cheap carpet. They stopped, lingering, waiting. I set my laptop aside, eyes fixed on the door. The fluorescent lights of the local grocery store cast harsh shadows across the empty parking lot. I stepped through the automatic doors, a single plastic bag swinging from my left hand. Ground coffee, protein bars, bottled water, simple supplies that would keep me going. The night air carried a hint of coming rain. I'd chosen this store carefully, far enough from my motel to break any surveillance pattern, close enough to walk if needed. The back lot offered 3 escape routes, and the security cameras were old enough to have predictable blind spots. I had noted all this automatically, the way I noted everything. Old habits kept you alive. The crunch of gravel behind the store made me pause. Not random footsteps, deliberate placement, trying to be quiet, but not quite managing it. I continued walking, my pace unchanged. I felt the presence of watchers, the weight of hostile eyes. The bag in my hand could become a weapon if needed. So could the pen in my pocket, or the brick wall, or the dumpster's metal edge. They made their move as I passed the loading dock. 2 shapes detached from the shadows, moving with the confidence of men used to having power. Even in civilian clothes, I recognized their swagger immediately. Officer Lawson and Officer Kramer. No badges tonight, no body cameras, no witnesses. Going somewhere? Lawson's voice carried that familiar sneer. I set my grocery bag down carefully. Evening, officers. Kramer circled to my left while Lawson stepped closer. Told you to mind your business. Did you? I kept my voice neutral, letting my body language project confusion and a hint of fear. Let them think they had the advantage. Let them commit. The first shove came from Lawson, hard enough to slam me back against the brick wall. I let it happen, absorbing the impact, reading their positions. Kramer moved in tighter, blocking the most obvious escape route. Their positioning was practiced. They'd done this before, probably dozens of times. Last chance, Lawson growled. Leave town tonight. Forget about the old lady. Or, I saw the punch coming, telegraphed by Lawson's shoulder tension. I could have blocked it, dodged it, countered it. Instead, I took it, letting my head snap back against the bricks. The pain was sharp but manageable. More importantly, it told me everything I needed to know about Lawson's reach, power, and control. Kramer laughed. Not so tough now, huh? I spat blood onto the concrete. Then I moved. The first 5 seconds were pure economy of motion. I grabbed Kramer's extended arm, twisted hard at the exact angle where the wrist bones couldn't resist, and felt the satisfying snap. Before Kramer's scream could fully form, I drove my knee up into Lawson's groin, then hammered an elbow into his throat. Both men staggered. I gave them no time to recover. I flowed through the darkness like water, using every shadow, every obstacle. A dumpster became cover. A drain pipe became leverage. The narrow space between buildings became a funnel that forced them to come at me one at a time. Each movement was precise, calculated, designed to end the threat as efficiently as possible. Kramer came at me wild, good hand swinging. I caught the punch, redirected it into the wall, then drove my palm up into Kramer's elbow. Another crack, another scream. Kramer collapsed, clutching his mangled arm. The flash of steel caught my eye. Lawson had pulled a knife, its blade gleaming dully in the security lights. The officer slashed forward, technique sloppy with rage and fear. I stepped inside the arc, trapped Lawson's wrist, and applied pressure to exactly the right nerve cluster. The knife clattered to the ground. "What the—" Lawson's words cut off as I swept his legs, driving him face down onto the asphalt. I knelt, one knee pressing into Lawson's spine. The officer's arm bent at a painful angle. I leaned close, my voice barely above a whisper. "I could kill you both right now. You know that, don't you?" Lawson struggled weakly. I increased the pressure until I felt tendons start to separate. "Next time won't end this clean," I continued, my tone conversational. "Next time I take everything. Your badge, your pension, your freedom. I have the factory records, Lawson. I know about the money. One phone call and it all burns down." I shifted my weight, driving my knee into a cluster of nerve endings that sent lightning bolts of pain through Lawson's body. The officer went rigid, then limp. "Tell your friends," I said. "Tell everyone. The old lady is off limits." I stood smoothly, retrieving my grocery bag from where I'd set it down. Kramer lay curled around his shattered arm, whimpering. Lawson hadn't moved, but his breathing was steady. They'd live. They'd heal. Eventually. In the distance, sirens began to wail far too late to matter, exactly as planned. I walked away unhurried, my footsteps measured and calm. I'd given them just enough to fear, just enough to question. Violence was a language they understood, but controlled violence, precise violence that would haunt them more than any beating. The grocery bag swung gently as I walked, its contents undisturbed. Blood trickled from my split lip, where I'd taken Lawson's punch. It would bruise, but that was fine. Sometimes you had to bleed a little to sell the story. The sirens grew louder, but I knew the response time had been deliberately slow. This was their territory, their rules. They hadn't expected me to understand the game, let alone turn it against them. Now, they would regroup, recalculate, try to figure out exactly what they were dealing with. Let them wonder, let them worry. Fear was a weapon, too. My shoes scraped softly against the concrete as I rounded the corner, leaving the parking lot's harsh lights behind. The night swallowed me completely, as it had so many times before. Behind me, red and blue flashers began to paint the walls, casting wild shadows that danced like accusations. Pink-tinged water swirled down the motel sink's drain. I flexed my bruised knuckles under the cool stream, watching dried blood dissolve from the small cuts. The mirror above the sink reflected yesterday's violence, a split lip, a darkening bruise along my jaw where Lawson's punch had landed. I'd slept a few hours, enough to stay sharp. The rest of the night I'd spent making calls, pulling threads, letting old contacts know I might need them. Dawn painted the grimy window with pale light as I buttoned a fresh shirt, covering the marks on my ribs. The highway diner sat just off the highway, its neon open sign buzzing in the early morning fog. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a booth with clear sightlines to both exits. The place was nearly empty. A few truckers at the counter, one elderly couple sharing toast. Kevin Brooks walked in right on time. I recognized him from the photo. Early 30s, thin face, dark circles under darting eyes. Brooks's tie was crooked, and his hands wouldn't stay still. He slid into the booth across from me, immediately reaching for a menu he didn't read. "Coffee?" A waitress appeared, pot already tilted. "Please," Brooks's voice cracked. He dumped 3 sugar packets into the cup as soon as she filled it. I waited until the waitress moved away. "Thank you for meeting me. I shouldn't be here." Brooks's leg bounced under the table. "If anyone from the bank sees me, no one followed you. I made sure." My tone was calm, steady. "Take a breath, Mr. Brooks. You're doing the right thing." Brooks's hands wrapped around his coffee cup like it was an anchor. "I worked IT support at Riverside National for 6 years. Contract position. They let me go 3 months ago. Budget cuts, they said. But I think they knew I'd seen things." "What kind of things?" "Transaction patterns, account irregularities." Brooks lowered his voice. "The bank runs quarterly audits, right? But there's this separate system that handles certain transfers, mostly involving police pension accounts. The numbers never matched." I nodded slowly. Money laundering had to be. I kept backup logs. Force of habit, you know. When they fired me, they wiped my workstation, but they didn't know about my personal backups. Brooks reached into his laptop bag with trembling fingers. It's all here. Account numbers, dates, amounts. Some transfers linked directly to offshore holdings. The flash drive Brooks placed on the table looked ordinary. I knew it was anything but. They'll deny everything, Brooks continued. Say I fabricated the data, try to discredit me. But I documented everything. Timestamps, authorization codes, it's bulletproof. You understand what happens next? I asked quietly. Once this goes public? Brooks's face was pale but determined. I'll testify. Whatever it takes. What they did to that old lady, Mrs. Thompson. It's not right. None of this is right. I pocketed the flash drive. I have a journalist contact, regional paper, solid reputation. She'll protect your identity as long as possible, but eventually... I know what could happen. Brooks's coffee had gone cold, untouched, but I can't keep looking the other way. I have kids, you know. What am I teaching them if I stay quiet? We worked out security protocols over breakfast. Neither of us ate. I gave Brooks a burner phone, specific check-in times, emergency procedures. The evidence was safely in the hands of Jessica Ramirez, an investigative reporter I trusted. The story moved fast after that. By midday, the first online articles appeared, carefully worded, but devastating. Riverside National's stock price wobbled. The police department issued no comment. City council members weren't answering phones. I picked up Ruby from the county jail in the afternoon. She looked exhausted but unbowed, her dignity intact despite wrinkled clothes and uncombed hair. Neither of us spoke during the drive to her house. In Ruby's small kitchen, I made tea while she changed clothes. Simple rituals, normal moments that felt precious after everything. When she finally sat at the worn kitchen table, her hands were steady. Kevin Brooks, I said, sliding a cup toward her. Name mean anything to you? Should it? Former IT contractor at Riverside National. He's the one who found the proof connecting the bank to police pension fraud. Same accounts that went missing when the factory closed. Ruby's fingers tightened around her cup. After all these years. Ramirez is running the story. More outlets will pick it up by tonight. The pressure is building. They'll fight back, Ruby said softly. They always do. Let them try. My voice held cold certainty. This time we have proof. Through the kitchen window, we watched the first news van park across the street. Then another. Ruby's phone started ringing. Reporters, lawyers, old friends, suddenly remembering her number. I should rest, Ruby said, looking decades older than yesterday. My heart's not what it used to be. I helped her to the living room couch, made sure her medication was within reach. She was asleep within minutes, peaceful for the first time in days. I kept watch from the window, tracking movements outside. More media arrived. A police cruiser drove past twice, not Lawson or Kramer's unit. My phone buzzed with updates from Ramirez. The story was gaining traction. Official statements were being demanded. Social media was catching fire. For one careful moment, I allowed myself to feel something like hope, not victory. I'd seen too much to trust easy wins, but the pressure was building. The rot was being exposed. Sometimes that was enough to start change. My burner phone lit up with a text from Brooks. They know. Morning light streamed through the courthouse's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. The hallway buzzed with energy. Reporters clutching notepads, camera crews adjusting equipment, lawyers in sharp suits conferring in hushed tones. I stood against the wall, eyes constantly moving, tracking every entrance and exit. Ruby sat on a wooden bench nearby, hands folded in her lap, wearing her best Sunday dress. She looked small against the courthouse's imposing architecture, but her spine was straight, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Jessica Ramirez, the investigative reporter, paced nearby, phone pressed to her ear. Her dark hair was messy from running her fingers through it, but her eyes were bright with controlled excitement. The wire services are picking it up, she whispered to me. CNN, MSNBC, they're all calling. The corridor grew more crowded by the minute. Local reporters who'd ignored the story days ago now jostled for position. I noticed several faces I recognized from Riverside National, including Karen Porter, the manager who'd offered that hollow apology. She avoided eye contact. At 10 o'clock, the district attorney's office doors opened. A tall woman in a charcoal suit emerged, flanked by assistants. The crowd surged forward, microphones extended like weapons. After careful review of new evidence, the DA announced, her voice carrying over the murmurs, "The state is dropping all charges against Mrs. Ruby Thompson, pending further investigation into the circumstances surrounding her arrest." The hallway erupted, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. I moved closer to Ruby, protective as always. "Mrs. Thompson," someone called out, "how do you feel about the charges being dropped?" Ruby rose slowly, steadied by my hand at her elbow. Her voice was clear and strong. "I feel grateful that the truth has finally come to light." The tears started then, silent streams down her weathered cheeks as decades of tension released. She turned to me, who wrapped my arms around her carefully, mindful of her fragility. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "It's over," she whispered against my shirt. "It's finally over." But I knew better. My jaw tightened as I watched the DA slip away without taking questions. This wasn't over, just shifting to a new phase. Ramirez pushed through the crowd, practically glowing. "The story's exploding," she said. "I've got network anchors fighting for exclusives. The Federal Banking Commission is opening an inquiry. Even the governor's office is calling." Official statements began flooding in. The mayor promised a full and transparent investigation. The police chief announced an internal review of procedures. Riverside National's parent company expressed deep concern and suspended several employees pending investigation. By early afternoon, I'd heard enough hollow promises. I helped Ruby into a taxi home, then drove my rental car to the Lakeside Motel, 20 miles outside town. Kevin Brooks was waiting in room 114, pacing between the beds. "You're doing the right thing," I said, watching Brooks stuff clothes into a duffel bag. "The safe house in Atlanta is ready. My contact will meet you tomorrow." Brooks's hands shook as he zipped the bag. When we shook hands goodbye, Brooks held on too long, his palm damp with fear. His fingers trembled violently. "I keep thinking about my kids," Brooks said. "What if?" "Don't," I cut him off. "Focus on the plan, one step at a time." But Brooks's eyes were wild, darting to the window at every passing car. "They have reach, connections. Money can buy anything in this town." "You're not in this town anymore," my voice was firm. "And you're not alone." The drive back to my own motel was quiet. Summer heat shimmering off the asphalt. I ran through contingency plans, security measures, escape routes, habits from my SEAL days that had kept me alive. My room was dark when I returned, the air conditioning humming. I flipped on the TV for background noise while checking my phones for updates. The local news anchor's voice suddenly cut through my thoughts. "Breaking news from the Lakeside Motel just outside city limits. Police are reporting the death of Kevin Brooks, a former Riverside National contractor, from an apparent drug overdose. Brooks was recently linked to allegations of financial misconduct." My muscles locked. I knew instantly. The two steady hands, the violent tremors, the wild eyes, classic signs of forced injection. They'd gotten to Brooks somehow between my departure and now. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered to silence, just soft breathing on the line. A warning, a message. The rage built slowly, methodically, like a nuclear reactor approaching critical mass. I stared at the TV screen where police lights flashed outside the Lakeside Motel. They showed Brooks's body being wheeled out, covered in a sheet. A tragic overdose, the reporter called it. Another piece of evidence erased. The phone rang again. Still silence, still breathing. My control snapped. I grabbed the TV and hurled it against the wall. The screen exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. In the sudden darkness, sirens began wailing outside my motel. Too close, too coordinated to be coincidence. They were coming for me next. But I wasn't Kevin Brooks. I wasn't afraid of needles in the dark. Through the broken window, red and blue lights painted the parking lot. Car doors slammed, boots on pavement. The Community Baptist Church basement hummed with hopeful energy. Paper streamers hung from exposed pipes, and folding tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes. The room was packed. Church members, local activists, and even a few reporters who'd stayed in town to follow Ruby's story. Reverend Samuel King stood at the makeshift podium, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. "Tonight we celebrate not just Sister Ruby's vindication, but the power of truth to overcome darkness. Scattered amens punctuated his words. Ruby sat in the front row, wearing a pale blue dress and her Sunday pearls. Her eyes were bright with tears as the community rallied around her. The fundraiser had already collected enough to cover her legal fees and lost pension payments. I lingered near the back wall, watching the doors. My ribs still ached from the motel arrest, but I'd made bail thanks to Ramirez's newspaper connections. Something felt wrong. The victory had come too easily. The system's retreat too smooth. "And now," Reverend King continued, "I'd like to invite Sister Ruby to say a few words." The basement doors burst open. Boots thundered down the stairs. Officer Lawson led the charge, his right arm in a brace, flanked by Kramer and 4 deputies. Their faces were hard, determined. Ruby Thompson. Lawson's voice cut through the shocked silence. He held up a paper. "New warrant for your arrest. Conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports." The crowd erupted in protests. Reverend King stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute." Lawson shoved past him. Kramer and 2 deputies converged on Ruby, who had risen shakily to her feet. "Please," she said, "I have my heart medication." They ignored her. Kramer grabbed her arm and yanked. Ruby cried out as they forced her to the floor. Her pearls scattered across the linoleum. My training kicked in. I moved without thinking. Muscle memory from countless operations. 3 steps would get me to Ruby. 2 seconds to disable Kramer, but I never made it. Deputies hit me from both sides. My head cracked against a metal chair. Hands grabbed my arms as someone shouted, "He's resisting! Watch out! He assaulted officers last week!" "Body cameras," someone in the crowd yelled. "They're turning them away." I fought to keep my arms under control as they twisted them behind my back. Steel cuffs bit into my wrists, ratcheted too tight. A knee drove into my back, grinding already bruised ribs against the floor. "Darius," Ruby's voice was thin with fear. "Please don't hurt him." Through the chaos, I caught glimpses. Ruby being dragged to her feet. Church members held back by deputies. Phones recording everything. Reverend King trying to reason with Lawson. Ramirez shouting questions that no one answered. "On your feet," a deputy growled, hauling me up. My ribs screamed in protest. They marched me toward the stairs, past faces twisted with anger and horror. At the police station, they separated us immediately. I watched helplessly as they led Ruby down a different hallway, her small figure surrounded by uniforms. Her eyes met mine briefly, tired, afraid, but still dignified. The booking process was deliberately rough. My fingerprints, photos, belongings cataloged and sealed. My phone disappeared into an evidence bag. The charges kept coming. Assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, conspiracy, interfering with an investigation. "Subject is trained military," Lawson announced loudly. "Extremely dangerous. Maximum security protocols. They put me in a holding cell deep in the building's bowels. No windows, single bulb, concrete bench." My ribs throbbed with each breath. In the distance, I heard other cell doors slamming. The system hadn't just reacted. It had planned this counterattack carefully. Wait for public sympathy to peak, then crush it with new charges, separate the targets, control the narrative. I had seen similar tactics in other countries, but experiencing it from the inside was different. I tested the cuffs subtly. No give. The cell was solid. They weren't taking chances after the alley fight. My carefully built network of evidence and witnesses was now cut off. No phone, no contacts, no way to warn anyone what was coming next. Hours crawled by. The holding cell's light flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows. My training helped me track time through shift changes and distant movements. I heard fragments of radio chatter, catching phrases like federal interest and special handling protocols. Near midnight, footsteps approached. A guard I didn't recognize appeared, face expressionless. "Harper," he said flatly, "time for processing." They led me through empty corridors to a processing room. Through a window, I glimpsed Ruby in another room, looking small and tired as they took her fingerprints again. Our eyes met briefly through the glass before guards shifted to block the view. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they documented every scar, every tattoo, every identifying mark. My military ID had already marked me as high risk. They weren't just booking me, they were burying me in the system. Back in the holding cell, the main lights powered down for night shift. leaving only dim security lighting. Somewhere in the building, other cell doors clanged shut with final echoing thuds. I sat on the concrete bench, back against the wall, mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. They'd miscalculated badly. I'd underestimated how far the corruption reached, how coordinated the response would be. Now Ruby was alone somewhere in the building, probably terrified, possibly without her medication. And I, for the first time since leaving the SEALs, was truly trapped. The cell door's lock engaged with a heavy click. In the low light, I could barely make out my own hands, separated, isolated, and contained, exactly as the system intended. The holding cell's darkness pressed against my eyes. My watch had been taken during processing, but my internal clock told me it was well past midnight. The concrete bench had long since leached away my body heat, and my ribs sent sharp protests with each shallow breath. Footsteps echoed through the corridors, guards making their rounds. I had mapped their patterns over the past hours. 3 minutes between passes, 2 guards per rotation, standard issue boots with rubber soles. But these new footsteps were different, lighter, less rhythmic. A small metal door at the bottom of my cell clicked open. The food slot. A hand appeared holding something dark and rectangular. 2 minutes, a voice whispered. Make it count. A burner phone. Basic model. My fingers closed around it as my mind raced through possibilities. The number was already dialed, ringing softly. Darius. The voice was familiar, calm, precise, touched with a Virginia accent. Been a while since Kandahar. Victor. I kept my voice low, angled away from the cell door. Didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Your message reached the right channels. Talk fast. What's the situation? I pressed against my aching ribs, organizing my thoughts. Elderly black woman named Ruby Thompson, targeted by local police in Riverside National Bank. They staged an arrest, doctored footage, killed a whistleblower named Kevin Brooks, made it look like an overdose. The bank connection. Money laundering through police pension accounts. Brooks had proof before they got to him. Everything's documented, but they seized my phone and files. Victor was silent for a moment. I could picture him, salt and pepper hair, reading glasses, deceptively casual posture, hiding a tactical mind. The man had pulled my team out of a Taliban ambush years ago. Now I needed extraction of a different kind. The woman Thompson. Where is she? Same facility, different wing. She has a heart condition. They're denying her medication. Medical negligence gives us leverage. Victor's tone sharpened. Local involvement, deep. Police chief, bank executives, at least 2 council members. They're desperate to contain this. New footsteps approached from the corridor, different from the guards. Measured, deliberate, professional. I tensed. Years of training, reading the subtle signals. Listen carefully, Victor said. Help is coming, but this gets ugly first. These people won't surrender power quietly. Are you prepared for that? I thought of Ruby's bruised wrists, her scattered pearls on the church basement floor, her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty. Whatever it takes. Good. Maintain discipline. When it starts, let them throw the first punch. But finish it. The footsteps stopped outside my cell. Keys jingled softly. They're here, I whispered. Remember everything by the book until they break it first. Then, no mercy. Understood. I could hear Ruby's voice from somewhere in the building, weak but still firm, asking again for her medication. My jaw tightened. Victor, thank you. Save it for after. And Darius, make it clean but make it count. The line went dead. I slipped the phone back through the slot just as it clicked shut. The footsteps outside my cell moved away, unhurried. Minutes stretched. I focused on my breathing, controlling the pain from my ribs, centering myself. More footsteps passed. Regular guards, irregular patterns. Now something was shifting in the jail's rhythm. Through the ventilation system, I caught fragments of radio chatter, new voices, new protocols. The night guard sounded uncertain, off balance. A woman's voice echoed from the medical wing, patient refusing treatment. Then Ruby's voice, stronger than before. I refuse nothing. I demand my prescribed medication. My fists clenched. They were pushing her toward a medical emergency, something they could blame on natural causes, a clean ending to their problem. But the footsteps in the corridor had changed again. More sets now, different cadences, the sound of professionals moving with purpose. Somewhere above, a door slammed, radio static crackled, a guard's voice. "Sir, we have unauthorized personnel." Then the first alarm began to wail. The sound bounced off concrete walls, filling the cell block with red emergency lights. I stood, muscles coiled, face calm. Through my narrow window, I watched shadows move across the corridor. Figures in tactical gear, moving with federal authority. More alarms joined the first, creating a rising chorus of panic. Radio calls overlapped. "Lock it down." "Who authorized?" Multiple teams at all exits. I settled into a ready stance, ignoring my protesting ribs. The next few minutes would decide everything. Victor was right. It would get ugly before it got clean. But I'd seen enough ugliness in this town, had watched enough good people suffer under corrupted power. The alarms reached a fever pitch as booted feet thundered through the lower levels. I breathed slowly, centered in the chaos. This wasn't revenge coming. This was consequence. This was justice, finding its teeth. The transport bay's fluorescent lights flickered, casting harsh shadows across concrete walls, still damp from pre-dawn mist. My handcuffs bit into my wrists as two deputies marched me down the echoing corridor. My ribs throbbed with each step, but I kept my face neutral, conserving energy. The bay doors opened with a metallic groan. Officer Lawson stood inside, arm in a fresh cast, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Behind him, Officer Kramer leaned against the transport van, trying to project casualness, but betraying tension in his shoulders. Two unfamiliar deputies flanked them, bigger men, faces I hadn't seen before. "Surveillance is down for maintenance," Lawson announced, his voice dripping with false professionalism. "Might take an hour to reset the system." The bay doors swung shut with a heavy clang. I noticed the security camera's red light was already dark. I counted heartbeats, noting positions, analyzing angles. The transport van blocked one exit, 4 opponents, limited space, concrete floors that would punish any fall. "Shame about the cameras," Kramer added, pushing off from the van. "Lot can happen in an hour, especially to prisoners who resist transfer." I kept my breathing steady as the deputies forced me toward the van. My chains rattled against the floor, standard prison transport restraints, connecting handcuffs to ankle shackles. Restrictive, but not impossible to work with. I'd trained for worse. Lawson stepped closer, showing teeth. "Remember what I said about next time not ending clean?" The first punch came from behind, a kidney shot that would have doubled over a normal man. I absorbed it, letting my body roll with the impact. The second hit targeted my injured ribs. Pain flared white-hot, but I remained upright, waiting. Nothing to say. Lawson grabbed my collar. No tough guy act now. I met his eyes calmly. "You should have brought more men." The next few seconds exploded into violence. As Lawson wound up for another punch, I dropped my weight suddenly, yanking my chains tight. The movement pulled one deputy off balance. I drove my shoulder up, catching the man's jaw with brutal force. Bone cracked. The deputy went down hard. Kramer lunged, but I was already moving. I twisted, wrapping my transport chain around Kramer's extended arm. One sharp pull sent the officer face first into the van's metal side. Blood sprayed from his broken nose. The second unknown deputy managed to land a solid hit to my ribs. Fresh pain blazed, but adrenaline dulled it to background noise. I hooked my leg chain around the deputy's ankle and pulled. As the man stumbled, I drove my knee up, catching him under the chin. The deputy's head snapped back. He crumpled unconscious before he hit the ground. "Stop him!" Lawson's voice cracked with panic. He fumbled for his weapon, but his injured arm slowed him. I didn't give him time. I spun, gathering chain slack, and whipped it across Lawson's face. The officer staggered. I pressed forward, ramming my shoulder into Lawson's chest. We hit the concrete wall together. Before Lawson could recover, I grabbed his cast and wrenched it backward. The snap of breaking bone echoed off concrete. Lawson's scream followed, high and desperate. Kramer had recovered enough to draw his pistol. "Don't move. I'll shoot." I was already moving. I dropped and rolled as the first shot cracked overhead. The transport chain tangled around Kramer's legs. One hard pull sent the officer sprawling. The gun skittered across concrete. I surged upward despite my restraints, driving my knee into Kramer's sternum. The officer gasped. I grabbed him by the throat and slammed his head against the floor. Once, twice. Kramer went limp. The bay fell silent except for Lawson's whimpers and the rattle of my chains. Blood pooled slowly around the unconscious man. Suddenly, sirens wailed outside, different from the jail's internal alarms. Professional, federal, multiple vehicles converging fast. The bay doors burst open. Armed agents in tactical gear poured in, weapons raised, moving with practiced precision. I recognized their stance, their discipline. This wasn't local law enforcement. This was federal authority arriving with overwhelming force. Federal agents, everyone on the ground. I was already kneeling, hands raised despite my chains. More agents secured the unconscious deputies. Lawson continued screaming as medics approached cautiously. A familiar figure stepped through the chaos. Victor Kane's badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he surveyed the scene. His expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight nod of approval. "Get those restraints off him," Victor ordered. An agent quickly unlocked my shackles. Lawson thrashed as medics tried to stabilize his arm. "You can't do this. We're law enforcement." "Former law enforcement," Victor corrected coldly. "Currently, you're under federal arrest for civil rights violations, conspiracy, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges my team will be happy to list while booking you." I rubbed my wrists as agents helped me up. My ribs protested, but the pain felt distant now. Around me, more federal personnel swept the bay, photographing evidence, securing the scene. Lawson's screams echoed off the walls as they cuffed him despite his broken arm. Victor stepped closer, speaking quietly. "Clean enough for you." "Clean enough," I agreed, watching as Kramer was dragged away unconscious. Ruby, already secured, medical teams with her now. Victor's eyes moved over the unconscious deputies. Quite a mess for a restrained man to make. "They didn't search me very well," I said. "Sloppy indeed." Victor allowed himself a small smile. "Sloppy all around, but that's about to change." Red and blue lights flashed across Riverside National Bank's polished windows as federal vehicles surrounded the building. The morning sun cast long shadows behind the agents as they moved with practiced efficiency, badges gleaming. Inside, chaos erupted as FBI cyber teams seized computers and federal marshals secured exits. Bank manager Karen Porter's face drained of color when agents approached her office. "This is highly irregular. Our customers?" "Ma'am, step aside," a senior agent ordered, showing her a warrant. "This branch is temporarily closed pending a federal investigation." In the server room, technicians worked methodically, cloning hard drives and securing backup tapes. Years of transaction records were extracted, each device carefully tagged and logged. The bank's carefully maintained facade crumbled as boxes of evidence emerged. Across town, in a dimly lit office at the Federal Command Center, I sat beside Victor Kane, watching unedited body cam footage on multiple screens. The raw video showed every second of Ruby's arrest in brutal clarity, the unnecessary force, the deliberate humiliation, the casual cruelty in the officers' voices, frame by frame. Victor said quietly, "Everything they tried to hide." He pointed to one screen. "Watch Lawson here. See how he positions himself?" This wasn't procedure. This was a message. My jaw tightened as I watched Ruby's pills scatter across the marble floor again. They never thought anyone would see the real footage. "Corrupt departments get sloppy," Victor replied. "They backed up everything thinking it protected them. Instead, he gestured at the wall of screens. They documented their own crimes. A junior agent burst in holding a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this. We found transfer records going back 15 years. The pension fund was being used to launder money through fake accounts. Multiple officials involved." Victor took the tablet, scanning quickly. Names: Police Chief Roberts, Mayor's Office, 2 council members, Thompson and Walsh. And look at these dates. They line up perfectly with when Mrs. Thompson was working as a bookkeeper. I leaned forward. She saw something back then. "That's why they've been watching her all these years, waiting for a chance to discredit her," Victor agreed. "But they didn't count on me being there when they finally moved." At the local hospital, doctors worked to stabilize Ruby's condition. The stress and lack of medication had nearly triggered heart failure. I visited as soon as she was cleared for visitors, finding her propped up in bed, looking frail but alert. The federal people came, she said softly. They apologized. Actually apologized. I pulled a chair close. It's not over yet, but it's starting. On the small hospital room TV, breaking news banners flashed. Cameras captured FBI agents leading Police Chief Roberts out of the station in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. Council members Thompson and Walsh were next, trying to hide behind lawyers as reporters shouted questions. Riverside National's executive team emerged from their offices with suit jackets covering their wrists, flanked by federal marshals. The bank's president, Timothy Morgan, stared straight ahead as cameras caught his walk of shame. Ruby watched it all unfold, tears sliding silently down her weathered cheeks. Her hand found mine, squeezing weakly. "All these years," she whispered, "I thought I was crazy. They made me doubt everything I knew." "You were never crazy," I said firmly. "You were right. And now everyone sees it." The afternoon brought more arrests. Deputy chiefs, senior bank managers, city officials who had helped cover up the corruption. Each surrender and arrest was broadcast live, impossible to ignore or deny. Local news anchors who had reported Ruby's aggression now backtracked frantically, highlighting the federal investigation's findings. In the hospital room, Ruby's doctor checked her vitals as we watched more footage. "Blood pressure still high," she warned. "Try to stay calm." But Ruby couldn't look away from the screen. Unedited body cam video played, now showing her treatment in the bank. Public outrage exploded online. Social media filled with calls for justice. National news picked up the story. "Look," I said softly, pointing to a new headline. "Systemic corruption exposed. Elderly woman's arrest reveals years of police and banking fraud." Victor visited later that afternoon, bringing updates. The investigation was expanding. More witnesses came forward, emboldened by the arrests. Former bank employees revealed pressure to profile certain customers. Junior officers admitted to following orders targeting specific citizens. "Mrs. Thompson," Victor said formally, "I want you to know this goes beyond just clearing your name. You exposed something that's been poisoning this town for decades." Ruby dabbed at fresh tears. "I never wanted all this. I just wanted to be treated like a person." "You deserve that and more," I said. "They tried to make you invisible, but you stayed strong." The hospital room TV continued broadcasting arrests into the evening. Each new development validated what Ruby had known, what she had endured alone for so long. The truth emerged in waves, washing away years of carefully constructed lies. As sunset painted the hospital room in soft orange light, Ruby watched another report about the investigation. Her hand tightened around mine. "They finally saw me," she whispered. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. Reporters packed the back wall, and sketch artists worked furiously as Judge Linda Harper prepared to speak. The morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Ruby Thompson sat straight-backed in the front row, dressed in a pressed navy suit, her silver hair neatly styled. I sat beside her, my presence steady and watchful. Behind us, rows of faces, community members, activists, and curious onlookers, waited in tense silence. Judge Harper, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, looked up from her papers. Her gaze swept the crowded courtroom before settling on Ruby. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice clear and firm, "please rise." Ruby stood slowly, my hand at her elbow for support. The room seemed to hold its breath. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Harper continued, "I have seen many instances of misconduct, but what happened to you represents a particularly egregious abuse of power. The evidence presented shows a systematic campaign of harassment, intimidation, and racial discrimination spanning decades." She lifted a document. "I am hereby dismissing all charges against you with prejudice. Furthermore, I want to state for the record that the behavior exhibited by law enforcement and banking officials in this case was not merely unprofessional, it was criminal." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Several rows back, former Officer Lawson's face darkened with rage. His arms, still in a cast, twitched visibly. "The settlements agreed upon today," the judge continued, total $12 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Riverside National Bank's charter is permanently revoked. The police department will undergo complete restructuring under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years. She paused, removing her glasses. Mrs. Thompson, I want to apologize to you personally. The system meant to protect you instead became a weapon against you. That ends today. Ruby's shoulders trembled slightly, but she remained composed. My presence behind her was like a wall of quiet strength. For the defendants, Judge Harper's voice hardened. Sentencing will begin next week. Former officers Lawson and Kramer face multiple federal charges, as do Police Chief Roberts and the other co-conspirators. I intend to make examples of every person who participated in this corruption. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Court is adjourned. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as Ruby turned from the bench. Her attorney, a federal prosecutor named Emily Wong, smiled warmly and squeezed her hand. Outside the courtroom, a wall of reporters waited, microphones extended. Mrs. Thompson, how do you feel about the verdict? Will you comment on the police department's future? What are your plans for the settlement? Ruby paused at the top of the courthouse steps, sunlight warming her face. The crowd below fell quiet, waiting. I stood slightly behind her, scanning faces, ever vigilant. I don't want to talk about money, Ruby said clearly, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. I want to talk about dignity, about being seen as human. That's what was stolen from me, not just by those officers or that bank, but by a system that looked away for far too long. More cameras flashed. She continued steadily. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in change, real change. So no one else has to fight this hard, just to be treated with basic respect. A reporter called out, "Are you angry about what happened?" Ruby's expression remained composed. Anger burns you up inside. I chose to stand my ground instead. Sometimes that's harder than fighting back. The federal prosecutor stepped forward to handle additional questions. Ruby moved carefully through the crowd, I clearing a path. We reached the bottom of the steps where Victor Kane waited beside a black SUV. "Ready to go home?" he asked quietly. Ruby nodded. More than ready. As we drove through town, we passed Riverside National Bank. The signs were already being removed, the windows papered over. Workers loaded boxes into trucks as federal agents supervised. They'll open a community credit union there, Victor mentioned. The settlement includes provisions for local financial services. I watched Ruby's reaction in the rearview mirror. She stared at the building that had caused so much pain, her expression thoughtful. "Good," she said finally. "People still need a bank, just one that serves everyone equally." We passed the police station next, where moving trucks were also present. The department's reorganization had already begun. New leadership would arrive next week along with federal oversight teams. Victor spoke again. "The sentencing recommendations are strong. Lawson and Kramer are looking at significant time. The chief and council members, too." "The system didn't fix itself," I said quietly. "It had to be forced." "No," Ruby agreed, "but it did finally bend toward justice. Sometimes that's all we can ask for. That truth eventually comes to light." We pulled up to Ruby's house. The front yard had been replanted with fresh flowers, erasing the vandalism from weeks before. New security cameras monitored the property discreetly. My addition. Victor opened her door. "There will be more media attention in the coming weeks. We can provide protection if you want it." "I'm not hiding anymore," Ruby said firmly. She stood straighter now, the weight of fear lifted from her shoulders. The morning sun caught the silver in her hair like a crown. She turned to me, who had been her quiet guardian through it all. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. Now I can breathe again. The autumn morning painted Oak Street in warm, golden light. The brick facade of the newly renovated building gleamed, its fresh paint and polished windows a stark contrast to the shuttered Riverside National Bank across the way. A modest crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, their quiet conversations creating a gentle murmur in the crisp air. Ruby Thompson stood near the entrance, elegant in a deep purple dress, her silver hair catching the sunlight. At 72, she carried herself with renewed strength, the shadows of fear long gone from her eyes. Community leaders, local residents, and even a few reporters formed a half-circle around her. Emily Wong, the federal prosecutor who had become a friend, stood at the podium. "Today marks more than just the opening of a financial institution," she announced, her voice carrying clearly. "It represents the triumph of dignity over discrimination, of justice over corruption, and of community over greed." From a bench across the street, I watched silently. My injuries from the jail transport bay had healed, leaving only faint scars to mark the battle. I'd traded my tactical gear for simple civilian clothes, but my alertness remained unchanged, eyes constantly scanning the surroundings out of habit. Victor Kane stepped up beside me, keeping his voice low. "The last sentencing was yesterday. Lawson got 18 years. Kramer took a plea for 12. The chief and council members are looking at decades." I nodded once, my expression unchanged. "The system worked this time because you made it work," Victor replied. "You heading out today?" "Soon as this is done." Across the street, Mayor Elizabeth Grant, newly elected after the scandal, gestured to a covered plaque beside the entrance. "It is my honor to dedicate this institution to a woman whose courage reminded us all what justice really means." Ruby stepped forward, grasping the cord. With one smooth motion, she unveiled the bronze plaque. "Ruby Thompson Community Credit Union, where everyone's dignity matters." Applause rippled through the crowd. Someone started a cheer that others quickly joined. Ruby's eyes glistened, but her smile remained steady as she accepted the ceremonial scissors. "Cut it, Mrs. Thompson," called a voice from the crowd. "Show that ribbon who's boss." Laughter spread warmly. Ruby's hands didn't shake as she positioned the scissors. The red ribbon parted with a crisp snick, and more cheers erupted. Camera flashes sparked like stars. I watched as people began filing inside for the reception. The building's interior had been completely transformed. Gone were the imposing counters and bulletproof glass of Riverside National. Instead, warm woods and comfortable seating created a welcoming space. The teller stations were open and accessible, designed for conversation rather than confrontation. "You should go in," Victor suggested. "You earned this victory too." I shook my head slightly. This is her moment. Better without complications. But before I could stand, Ruby was crossing the street toward me. She moved more easily now, her steps light with newfound freedom. The morning sun caught her face, highlighting a piece that had been missing in those first dark days at the bank. She settled onto the bench beside me, smoothing her skirt. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" "Not really my kind of party," I replied softly. "No, I suppose not." Ruby studied my face. "You know, most people would have walked away that day, would have decided it wasn't their problem. Most people haven't seen what happens when good people look away." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "What you did, stepping in, staying when it got ugly, that wasn't just about justice, it was about seeing someone's humanity when others wouldn't." I shifted slightly, uncomfortable with praise. "You did the hard part, standing your ground day after day, year after year. That takes more courage than anything I did." "Different kinds of courage," Ruby said, "both necessary." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small envelope. "Before you go, I want you to have this." I accepted it reluctantly. Inside was a single key. "There's a cabin on Lake Erie," she explained, "part of the settlement. It's quiet there, peaceful, the kind of place where a person might find some rest if they wanted it." "Mrs. Thompson, Ruby," she corrected gently, "and I'm not asking you to stay, just letting you know you have a place here if you ever need it." I turned the key over in my hands, feeling its weight. Across the street, laughter spilled from the credit union's open doors. Children darted between adults' legs, playing tag on the sidewalk. The scene was ordinary, unremarkable, exactly what had been denied here for so long. "I should go," I said finally, standing. "They'll be looking for you inside." Ruby rose as well, straightening her dress. "Take care of yourself, Darius Washington, and thank you, not just for what you did, but for who you are." I nodded once, tucking the key into my pocket. No other words were needed. We had both seen truth prevail, had watched justice grind slow but inexorable. Some victories didn't need speeches. I turned and walked away, my steps unhurried. Behind me, I could hear Ruby being called back to the celebration, could hear the happy chaos of new beginnings. I didn't look back. This wasn't my story anymore. It belonged to the community now, to the people who would build something better from the ashes of corruption. A few blocks away, my packed duffel waited in the truck. I had other battles to fight, other wrongs to right, but the key in my pocket felt like a promise, not of home exactly, but of possibility, of peace earned through justice. The sound of laughter followed me down the street, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in the fight itself, but in what grew afterward. Dignity restored, community rebuilt, humanity recognized. Across from the new credit union, Ruby settled onto a sunny bench. Her expression was serene as she watched families enter the building she had helped create, not through violence or vengeance, but through the simple, powerful act of refusing to back down. Justice had finally come, undeniable and complete. This story isn't just about one elderly woman facing cruelty at a bank or one Navy SEAL who refused to look away. At its heart, it's a raw reminder of the quiet, unbreakable power of human dignity. And what happens when someone finally decides that dignity is worth fighting for? Ruby Thompson didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't throw punches. She simply stood there, spine straight, voice steady, holding a pension check that represented 32 years of honest labor. They tried to make her invisible. They tried to shrink her into someone small, confused, criminal. But she refused to disappear. And because one man, Darius, saw her not as a statistic or a problem, but as a person worthy of respect, the whole rotten system began to crack. The real lesson cuts deep. Silence in the face of injustice isn't neutrality. It's complicity. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like an old woman refusing to hang her head, or a stranger quietly choosing to stay when everyone else walks out. It looks like refusing to let cruelty become normal. It looks like remembering that every human being, especially the ones society tries hardest to erase, carries a story, a heart, a right to be seen. We live in a world that still tries to decide who belongs and who doesn't. But Ruby's trembling hands gathering her scattered pills, her soft "thank you" in the ambulance, her final words outside the courthouse, they remind us that dignity isn't given by institutions or badges or bank accounts. It's claimed. And once someone claims it with quiet, unshakable resolve, it becomes impossible to take away again. So the next time you see someone being treated as less than human, I hope you remember Ruby. I hope you feel that same tug in your chest that Darius felt. Because change doesn't start with heroes in capes. It starts with ordinary people who decide, right here, right now, that looking away is no longer an option. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone's dignity was under attack? And what did you do? Drop your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. There are so many more real, heart-shaking stories waiting to remind us who we can be when we choose to stand up. Thank you for being here. Let's keep seeing each other.